Good morning, everybody. You know, I think about the 20th century and what industry really defined, that 100 years. And I keep coming back to aerospace. We helped win the Cold War. We put a man, on the moon. We really shrunk the world with commercial air travel, brought the world closer together. And during that whole time, it was the U.S., aerospace industry that led that. And as we enter the 21st century, I think the question is, will aerospace define this century as well? And I think the companion question to that is, will it be the U.S. aerospace industry that will lead it? Right now I think we're at an interesting time. We don't have the capability to put a man in space right now with the United States launch vehicle, with the F-35 in test flight, with the 787 complete. There are no real active design teams, building, manned airplanes in the United States for the first time probably in 100 years. And, today I'm joined by, some industry leaders, the technical leaders of the three largest aerospace companies in the world, and also we're joined by the former chief engineer of NASA, who is now in academia. So I think the question I'd like to pose to this group is, what are the challenges that we have? What are the things that we have to do as an industry to make sure that we maintain our leadership as we go forward? And let me briefly, introduce the group that's with me. And in this group, I think over the last 3 or 4 decades, there hasn't been anything that's flown in this world that certainly these gentlemen here haven't been involved in or touched. And to my left is Ray Johnson, who is the chief engineer, chief technology officer for Lockheed Martin. And next to Ray, we have David Hills, who is in charge of technology for Airbus America. Next to him is Mike R. Since I can't pronounce Mike's last name, and those of you that work in NASA understand exactly what I'm talking about. But Mike is somebody that was a chief engineer at NASA and now is at Johns Hopkins in charge of all the space activities there. And at the end, my good friend John Tracy, who is the chief technology officer of the Boeing company. And what I'd like to do is just pose the same question to the 4 gentlemen up here, and that question is, what do you view as the biggest issues facing the U.S. in maintaining our leadership in aerospace? And Ray, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Jim. There we go. I guess as Rick Ambrose highlighted in his talk, the budgetary challenges facing the industry and facing the nation are real, and they're not going to go away. And so I think that forcing innovation to solve those problems, Jim, you highlighted the fact that we as an industry have taken on and met some of the largest challenges that the world has ever faced. Certainly the United States has faced, from World War II, the Cold War, man on the moon, all the things that were driven by politics but answered by technology. And so I think the challenge now is, can we take the innovative spirit that met those challenges from a capabilities point of view and have them apply toward innovation? That's one. The second challenge, I think, is doing a better job in learning how to work on an international stage. I've said this in the past, and I don't think it's overstating, that no nation, not even the United States, is able to take on all the challenges of space alone. And it opens up opportunities as you see China and other nations increase their capabilities in space. We've done, I think, an excellent job on the ISS of partnering with Russia. I think we can open up that aperture to do more partnering. And then finally, the thing that I worry about maybe the most, and probably shouldn't have had it be last, and that is the workforce. We as an industry face, I think the baby boom generation, everyone understands that, but it's really a baby boom and Apollo generation who are kind of getting ready to walk out the door. And how do we, with the arguably declining interest, if not numbers, in science and technology, and the capabilities in science and technology in the United States in particular possibly waning, how do we ensure that that next generation of Apollo scientists are in our industry, and we can keep the industry attractive in the face of sequestration and other pressures that we as an industry face? How do we keep this an exciting place for young people to come? Thank you.
David?
Okay. I think Ray's probably stolen most of my items, but I'll touch on them anyway. I think there are 5 topics that I'd put on the table. The first is the basic drivers which we're facing in terms of environment and in particular also commercial. And both of those I think will push the limits to where the technology goes, which really asks us all to step up I say. I think associated with that therefore is a consolidated vision across the nation about how we will actually move forward in terms of meeting those goals and those drivers. And I think talking about reaching the edges or the limits of physics, you're talking about some major innovation steps. And to manage those major innovation steps or leaps is not something which is trivial. And I think we need a clear vision about how we're going to do that. And maybe it's through X-planes, maybe it's through some other form of demonstration, but what is clear, when you make big jumps, there's no way you can do it without careful demonstration. It probably also brings the third point, which is funding. I think we need coherent funding, and we need the volume of funding. I'll put on the table the recently announced Clean Sky 2 program from Europe. It's around about $5.5 billion over 7 years, and it reflects how the rest of the world continues to invest substantially in this industry. And the US, I think, needs to match that, if not exceed it. The fourth point is, as Ray said, globalization. I think the policies and practices need to be reconsidered, reevaluated, to ensure that the US plays a clear role in terms of the broader international and global technology supply chain. And finally, as Ray pointed out, the fear for the next generation, the whole topic around STEM, and how we continue to motivate our people to get the most innovative, the most interesting and dynamic people into our industry in order to meet those challenges which we will face over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So those are my 5.
Mike?
Well, I think I've got the same couple of major themes. I'll turn a couple of them around. So on the workforce side, I absolutely agree with the speakers, but as a professional society, I think the AIAA needs to think through very hard how we take care of the very early career folks. I was very happy to see as many early career faces out here as I did, because I frankly had feared that we'd have too many people that had been told you can't come unless you've got a paper, or you can't come unless you're chairing a session or something like that. And that's not what we need as a professional society. We need our young folks to be able to join these groups to learn from the mid-career, learn from the late career folks. And especially in an environment where we're so heavily skewed to the later career demographics. And so we have a relatively small cadre, so we really need to figure out how to engage that precious resource. And part of that will be going to the various folks that believe that everything can be done on Skype and nobody ever needs to attend a professional meeting. On the investment front, I'd like to turn it around to a little different area. I've come to believe over time that one of the places where we have a hole right now is our investment in engineering tools and methods. And so there tends to be an emphasis on things that can turn into a widget, that can turn into a new material, and very little emphasis in most arenas on how do you use these things. And our process historically has been, I invent a new thing, then I figure out what I can do with it, and then I figure out how to analyze it and design with it on a sound engineering basis. And so I see things right now, for example, from my NASA days, we're still relying on the shell buckling standards that NASA developed in the 60s. We have some work going on at NASA to develop new standards, taking advantage of new technologies, both in metrology, but also in the machining and techniques. But that's been passing a tin cup, and that's just one example out of dozens and dozens of places where we're not making those kinds of investments that can move us forward, and that turns directly into capability, because if you can lightweight an aircraft or a rocket, get more payload because you haven't put the conservatism into the design. Or similarly, when you take ARMD, I think has a budget initiative before the Hill to look at composite structures and how do we really build composite airplanes instead of building aluminum airplanes out of composite materials. And so those kinds of things, we see them in bits and pieces, but we need to be able to make those kinds of investments broadly that will pay off over many, many decades.
John?
There's an advantage in going last because you can sort of foot stomp what everybody else said before you. So I'll just make 2 points. I think there are 2 areas that are not new. They've been around for decades that have a big impact on us. One is the affordability and the time it takes for us to develop new systems, and related to that is the society's public perception of what we do. And these 2 things are closely coupled. I think in general, the society looks at aerospace as a very static industry that probably really hasn't changed much from the late 60s. And so that they aren't aware of the great advances that we're making, the huge problems we're solving on a daily basis. As a result of some of the problems that our industry has had in terms of the speed to develop new systems, the cost, the input they get is more often on how long it takes us to do something or how much it costs. And as a result, the positive excitement that people had towards aerospace when a lot of us were growing up, that caused many of us to go in the field, just doesn't exist today. And that leads to all these problems where we have not enough people going into STEM, budget problems, funding government systems, problems getting capital to develop private systems, et cetera. So I think those two areas, the fact that we're viewed as a static industry and the fact that we haven't gotten a good handle as an industry on affordability and reducing the amount of time to develop new systems, I think those are huge things that if we make progress on, the aerospace industry will be substantially stronger.
John, with new starts being years and decades apart, with the lack of new starts at the Department of Defense, with new starts on the commercial side being once every decade and a half, how do we keep our design teams sharp? How do we continue to have that capability within the enterprise to be able to do development activities? Building things is one thing, but designing them is another, and transitioning work from detailed design into production is one of the hardest things we do. How do we make sure we stay on top of that, John? And we'll come back this direction this time.
Sure. David mentioned one thing, investment in processes and tools. That's why even in between starts, you can keep some teams technically sharp on at least that aspect, but that doesn't prepare them to solve the real problems that come with systems integration of an actual system. The next level beyond the processes and tools are doing prototypes on a regular basis. Again, when you field the prototypes, you're hitting the real problems that are going to affect you. But really, in my belief, the only way to achieve the goal you mentioned, Jim, was to continually, on a regular basis, develop new systems. And the only way you can do that is if you develop techniques, approaches, practices that allow you to develop new systems in a very affordable way. Continuous development versus what we call the moonshot approach, where you do a huge thing every 20 years, is definitely what we have to do going forward.
Okay. Mike?
I absolutely agree. I think the prototyping is really important, and I do think that a stepwise evolutionary approach to these big systems as opposed to building the be-all and end-all from the beginning, especially as we've seen in many of these things, when you try to put every possible requirement in from the beginning, you probably have built something that you actually can't get. You have to demonstrate value before you get there. I do also think that in the space world, there are also some advantages to some of the smaller systems, both to take over some of the jobs that we have traditionally done with bigger systems. They won't be the panacea in that realm, but they're also a place where you can train teams to work together in a much faster reaction environment where a life cycle is a year or two as opposed to 10 years.
Yep.
Yeah, I really agree with everything that's been said before. I mean, I think the learning by doing is quite key, both in terms of developing skills, competence, and general understanding, but also in terms of the technology transfer, the knowledge transfer. So the older hands to be able to pass information on to the younger members of our design teams. It's quite important to be together and working on common problems and to share that information. I think my only concern is that when you're working on an R&T project, there's a completely different feel to working on a real project where you've got very fixed and firm deadlines to meet. You know, that aircraft will take off on, I don't know, whatever it is, May the 6th, 2013. And if you're the guy that stops it, then that focuses the mind. And I think it does bring to the design process actually a slightly different approach, that you don't feel that same urgency and need to solve problems when you're working in maybe the sort of more demonstration phase. But having said that, I think moving forward on demonstrators is clearly an excellent way forward, probably the only way forward, either full size or on a component level.
Ray?
In essence, Jim, I think I'd answer, I agree completely. We, like other companies in this industry, are facing an increased production in terms of fewer new starts, and so a lot of the emphasis is on production. I think the answer is you bring design into the production, and you employ those design engineers in ways that they haven't had an opportunity to be employed in the production side. And Rick mentioned the digital tapestry and advanced manufacturing. I think what we see is we're moving from an era where you can use advanced manufacturing to reduce the size, weight, and power, so you get better swap in lighter aircraft and either have bigger payload or cheaper launch or those kind of things. But the part that you manufacture is oftentimes a 3D manufactured part that looks a lot like the original part. And I think the opportunity is to design and build parts that functionally do what you need them to do, but because you don't have the constraints of manufacturing, they may look completely different. That will bring about major changes in the producibility and the size, weight, and power, and in the advantages in that production. So as you think about the life of an aircraft, whether that's 30 or 40 years, and you go through block upgrades, you have an opportunity to bring the design features into that producibility and the production side, and thereby employing the design engineers, keeping their creative spirit alive, et cetera.
Very good. With those challenges in mind, the question I'd like to pose next is, what is the role and what is the mission of AIAA to better support the member companies and also the United States government? And David, why don't we start with you on that one?
Okay, well, I see the mission of AIAA threefold. One, it's to promote professional standards. I think it does an excellent job at doing that. The second is to provide a forum and a framework like this for exchange of information, sharing of ideas, and coming up with a cohesive view of a particular topic. And then the final point is around information, so informing public, government, whoever, to increase the understanding of the general aerospace space environment. So I think those are the three major missions that I see for the AIAA. I have a slight problem with the last one in terms of the information and informing. I think there's a real job to be done, as John said, to explain in very simple and easily understandable terms what we are all about. And I think that's absolutely key and critical to continuing to get public support for our industry. I think the issue that I have is around the one where we then move into one of advocacy. And to be honest, I'm not entirely convinced of the added value of organizations like AIAA picking up a strong advocacy role. But I think in terms of identifying things that we can do collectively, things that we can deliver collectively, I think that really is a great opportunity for the AIAA, particularly in the area of STEM and in terms of understanding collectively what we view and what we see the collective objectives are for this industry and what the challenges are, and making sure that's understood in an easy and understandable way.
Okay. Mike?
So I think, and I don't think this one falls totally on AIAA, but I think there's a dialogue that needs to happen of how all of these organizations that are involved in aerospace can start telling the story. How can the company start telling the story in the process of doing their business? I think it's very clear with the paucity of technically educated folks in Congress that there's a lot of education that has to happen, and not everything is going to come magically out of a Silicon Valley type of environment of, you know, two guys in a garage and all of a sudden you end up with a composite aircraft or something on the. And so we need to be able to tell that story, how these things happen. Rick Ambrose talked about GPS, you know, that kind of appeared magically, and I don't think there's a wide appreciation that there was 20 plus years of investments in RF space-based navigation technology, starting with transit very shortly after Sputnik. You know, we just see these things that have happened. One of the ones that really bugged me was when I was sitting at home in force during the furlough, when I was wearing my NASA hat. I must have seen 100 times the little Southwest advertisement that was talking about the winglets and saying how much gas they saved and or fuel they saved, and the last line was, "Thank you, thingamajiggies." And if that last line had said, "Thank you, NASA, for inventing that technology that saves all of that fuel," wouldn't that have sent a powerful message? And I don't mean to pick on Southwest, but we all have opportunities to tell this story, and if we miss any one of those opportunities, we really are missing a bet to build the appreciation for what we do, because it's going to be in hundreds or thousands of such messages. So there may be a way for the organizations and the professional organizations and the companies to think about how we do that and build that into our everyday messaging.
John?
First, to Mike's point, I'd like to thank Southwest Airlines for buying an all-Boeing fleet. I hope there's someone from Southwest in the audience. We love you. Mike's other point, which, you know, AIAA can partner with more community or entertainment groups to get the message out. I remember one of the highlights I recall was at one point Michael Jordan had a sneaker commercial and in the commercial, I think Spike Lee, in the role of Mars Blackman, was studying under an AIAA scientist. They said, "This is Professor so-and-so from the AIAA." And that combination of pop culture with what we do, I think, was really powerful to get the message out, just as an aside. Obviously, Jim, the areas of public policy influence, technical interchange, those are all critical, and I think we could talk about each one of those for a long time. But for me personally, the most important thing is professional development. And professional development, I don't necessarily mean the fantastic short courses and books that AIAA publishes. I mean just the day-to-day AIAA activities. There was no organization that I learned more from to prepare me for my various jobs in AIAA. Starting from going to a conference, then presenting a paper at a conference, then being a session chair, then organizing a conference, being on TAC, being in a technical activities committee, participating in the AIAA journal as associated. Each one of those things, I learned something new. The first place I ever talked to a customer was at an AIAA meeting, because it was, and so you could learn how to do, you know, business development and marketing in a safe environment. And so there's so many things that people can participate in that help the aerospace industry just by participating in the day-to-day activities of AIAA. I think it's an incredible opportunity.
Okay. Ray?
Yeah, I think AIAA is doing a good job. And I think the challenge, and not just the SciTech piece of AIAA, I think they do a really good job of linking all the various components, especially the technology component and the early career development. I think the only recommendation I would give is, and they're doing a better job than some other organizations that we all are associated with, and that is transitioning from the needs of the current members to the needs of the new members, and really reaching out and trying to understand what those new members are looking for so that you remain an attractive organization for people to join and be a part of, and then be able to take advantage of those early career opportunities and development, because the way that the new members want to develop may not be the way that we developed, and so I think you have to think about transitioning to a new way of thinking in terms of what the new members want.
Yeah, very good. You know, the point on the government, there are very few scientists and engineers in Congress. I think that's not lost on any of you here. And I think it's really incumbent on all of us, AIAA leadership, company leadership, everybody here, to tell that story of how important science and technology is to our way of life and certainly the economy of the United States. And about half of our GDP is really driven by technology, and will continue to be driven by that technology. And that kind of gets me to my next question, and that is, what is the role of government, relative to R&D, and especially what I'll call the high-risk R&D. Companies are not going to invest in a technology that doesn't have a clear application, certainly not a technology that has a clear application doesn't have a clear application for decades, 10, 15, 20 years. And what do we really look to the partnership of industry and government as we go forward developing technology that's going to fuel, what the space vehicles and the airplanes of the future are going to look like? And, maybe, Mike, we can start with you on that.
Well, I think the essential role of government is going to be to take on the high-risk things, or the things that need a long-term investment. A company really can't take on something that's going to take 10 years to pay off. You owe your shareholders more than that, or the things that have a small chance of paying off. And so those are the kinds of things that the government needs to do. I'll go back to my previous remark. One of the things that need help is building the picture for the various stakeholders that understand that not everything is going to pay off in a year or two. Because in the current budget environment, I see everything that we're doing gets pushed into the short term. Show me, before I give you any money to work on that, show me how it's going to pay off, and I get a positive ROI. Where we know historically that many things that had the most impact were the ones that it was very hard to predict exactly what they would be, and if one of 100 really pans out big, you're way ahead of the game. So we need to be able to build that picture into people's mind, and so we have to have that whole spectrum of things. You need the fundamental researchers in academia that are just understanding the fundamentals of materials and processes, understanding where there might be intersections between biology and biological sciences and engineering, just to start building engineering understanding. And then you start needing the government to be sponsoring long term. Not all of it has to be done within the government, but I think there's a sponsorship that has to happen to start figuring out what these things mean. And then at some point, then the companies will be able to pick those up when you start seeing a real return on the payoff and how it will turn into a product.
David?
Yeah, I'd agree entirely. I mean, I think the opportunity for government, and I don't know whether it is feasible or not, is to provide a long-term view and a long-term committed contract, if you like, between government and the research community, academia, industry, research labs, to actually see something through from start to finish over a period of time instead of continuously renegotiating on an annual basis. I think that's what you really need in this game, a degree of focus and a degree of long-term stability to be able to take that longer-term view.
Right.
The term high risk, high payoff has the word risk in it. And I think what I fear is that the cost, schedule, and performance mentality and the lack of ability to take risk in that kind of thinking has been applied to programs that it should be applied to, and then unfortunately been applied to programs that have risk in them. And if you drive out all that risk and force it to be well-defined and well-articulated, never deviate, never have an error, the scientific method requires learning. And in learning, you can't simulate everything, and you actually have to fly things, you have to test things, and there will be failures during that process. And if you look back historically at programs that did have failures and became ultimately successful, you have to ask yourself today, would those programs have been continued, and would we have those capabilities that we rely on today in that process that we, I think, understand, the technical audience understands that process and the scientific and development method, but unfortunately some politicians and program managers don't understand it well, and they're getting scrutinized from a variety of people, and so they are responding to that scrutiny without understanding. To get back to your point about not enough S&T people in political positions, I think that relates to that basic question.
John?
I think, to repeat the one point made, fundamental basic research, the government should invest in that. Advanced systems that are high risk and have high payoff for the economy in general, I think is very important. But specifically, I think the government should make investments into programs that will inspire the next generation, where when you say, to raise the point, high risk, high payoff, the payoff might not be measurable in terms of return on investment in a dollars and cents way, but it would have a huge positive impact on our society and culture by inspiring a whole nother generation of engineers. So I think everything from the most minute, arcane detail in a particular fundamental research area to very large advanced systems such as a mission to Mars that we call out and we stick with. The government has a role in each and every one of those things that can't be repeated by anybody else.
You know, maybe I can just pile on what you just said, John, and what you said, Ray, and that has to do with risk-reward and the kind of contract structure that drives the behavior of different contractors. And I'd submit to you that we wouldn't have an F-22 flying today in the configuration that it is if that had been a fixed-price development contract versus a cost-plus program. I'm not sure that we'd have an AHF or a program like that if it was a fixed-price program. Contractors are going to dump things down. They're going to use older technology. That they're not going to push the envelope if there is a huge risk to their corporations. And we have to strike the right balance, I think, between fixed-price development and cost-plus. And I'd really be interested in some of the thoughts, especially from the contractor community on that, and then certainly from you as well, Mike. And I know you've been thinking about this one a lot, Ray, especially with some of the new policies we're seeing coming out of the Pentagon.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you completely. I mean, the type of contract is structured to enable the balancing of that risk and reward. And we have seen, as you say, an oscillation in thinking. I believe that we're going back to a more balanced view and recognizing that the cost-plus contract that during development is appropriate. And so I kind of feel like although we've faced some challenges, I think we may be moving in the right direction today.
David?
I've probably got very little to comment on this particular topic. I just fear that moving back to a cost-plus basis is probably somewhat unlikely, but I'll take your guys' guidance on that.
Mike?
I think there are a couple of things that may help us on that one. Is that I think what we've seen in the last few years is a paucity of prototyping type of work, of small projects that can blaze that path. And so that's in part led to this, the be-all, end-all program in which you're having to invent everything from a fresh sheet of paper. And so if we can move down that path of being able to start building prototype systems, starting building precursor systems, that can help us down that path. I don't think that for the big complicated things or the things that are really pushing the edge, that's going to get you in an environment where you can do a fixed price on a really major cutting edge system development. So I think we still need those in the basis there. I think the other piece is that I think that there needs to be a better discussion of what is a commercial market and where can companies bring other things to play, because there seems to be a lot of wishful thinking of if we could imagine something could happen, then that the companies will immediately be able to raise lots and lots of money and make the cost to the taxpayer be very low. And I think that dialogue needs to be happen in a lot greater fullness to say when is it reasonable for companies to invest in what I would call a truly commercial product where there's a real market that's outside of the government, and where is the market only within the government, and we may need a different approach.
John?
Most aerospace companies are publicly held, and as a result have to answer to shareholders. And I think the shareholders demand a certain level of return on the capital they invest, and they want to make sure that no particular program that you take on can damage the company for the long term. So I think there is pressure from the shareholder side to only take on fixed price development programs where the risks are very well understood. And to Mike's point, on some systems that we're asked to work on, the performance specifications are pretty rigorous, and to achieve those you have to take on significant risks. So at times it's just totally inappropriate to do certain development under firm fixed price. That said, though, there is a role for it because it does put pressure on you as an engineer to look at affordability, to manage risk, to identify risks early on, to not travel it, to have solid plans for mitigating it, and that is a positive thing. So I think it really depends on the particular procurement, but the more that we are pushed towards the fixed price development, the more and more we have to assure that there's been significant prototyping done, that the technologies are all at TRL level 9 before you start, that you understand the manufacturing processes thoroughly, and often the systems that we're asked to build, they're such that you don't have time to do all those things.
Jim, if I could just add on John's excellent comments, I think there is a role for, of course, there's a role for fixed price contracts, and I think as I mentioned, the decision process, when they are appropriate, the better partnership and understanding that the customer and the contractor have in really well understanding as well as you can the risks that are in the various phases of the program, that will lead to, I think, the right kind of contract and appropriate contract. So what it really goes back to is the relationship with the customer and the understanding.
Yeah, I'd like to build on that too. I think that, go back to the thought about prototyping or building precursor systems. We often are guessing at what we think is achievable or needed in terms of the ultimate performance of a system and how that will flow down in the requirements. And so being able to actually build something can build that understanding both between the customer and the contractor community, and get to the point where you may be able to say, if you can set the bar here, at that point it makes sense to do a fixed price development and then put that pressure on the teams to build to that bar, don't let it grow beyond or don't grow less. But in an environment where everything is paper or we have to invent it quickly on the fly, it makes it impossible for the two sides to work together with each other.
This last comment Mike made, and Ray as well, I think the point about working together and working towards the same goal and having the same objective in mind and viewing the contractor and the customer as a team with the same goal, because that trust has been developed, that's crucial to the success of any program.
Right now AIAA represents 35,000 aerospace professionals, and that's well less than half of the professionals working in the industry. And the question I'd like to pose is, what can we do to be more relevant, and what can we do to grow the membership, and certainly for the contractors, and also for you, Mike. How can we grow the membership within NASA, within academia, within the contractors? And John, why don't we start with you on that one?
Let's see. I think the first thing that you can do to grow the membership, as I stated before, I think membership in AIAA is absolutely essential to a good aerospace career. I don't see how you could feel that you were doing a good job and you are part of the community unless you're a member of AIAA. So I'm all in on that front. I think the secret, though, is getting the people when they're just starting out, and the student chapters on every college campus need to be present, they need to be active, they need to be supported by the local industry around that campus, for their events, bringing speakers in, et cetera. And that gets the people off on the right track. The next thing is for the young professionals. Once they start their job, they don't have a lot of money, and so finding a way to get them in it's some sort of reduced membership possibly, just so they get in the habit of every year participating in AIAA and having part of their aerospace identity be tied to being an AIAA member. The other thing is to keep people engaged in an ongoing way. The model I grew up with was you came to, depending on what your discipline was, you would come to 1 or 2 specific AIAA conferences each year and participate. And you're going to that conference to find out the latest technical developments in your field, getting the books that had all the papers in, taking them home and studying those. That was the model I grew up in. I'm not sure that works today, especially under a lot of the financial constraints people have. But figuring out a way to get that intellectual connection with the membership through less expensive means, whether it's through webcasts or electronic journal distribution, I think that's also essential.
Okay. Mike?
So I absolutely agree with those remarks. I think we do need to ask the young folks coming up and say what's effective for you in an environment, because they grew up in a different way than I did. So I grew up in an environment where the only way you had to talk to your peers in the community was to go to the meetings. That's clearly not true today. That said, I think we can't ever lose the picture that this is the place where we protect ourselves against confirmation bias. This is the place where we throw out our ideas and let our peers throw out the BS card, right? And they beat on our ideas and they make them stronger. And so once we've got that final paper in there, or we take it out and we build a product with it, we know that we actually had the answer right because our peers took away our confirmation bias and made us be honest. So we've got to work on that piece. And I will tell you, I think it's absolutely essential that we keep talking to the various stakeholders. I'll tell you back, no surprise, after a couple of bad incidences, there was huge pressure within the government that, all conferences are bad, nobody can go anywhere. And the AIAA was absolutely essential when I was in NASA to helping us get some of those restrictions loosened and get the picture painted that, no, this wasn't about, going to a resort and doing things you don't want to see in the Washington Post on there, that these were really serious discussions about exchanging information and about building knowledge, about disseminating knowledge. So making sure that we've got that picture, because if you're a early career engineer working at NASA, it's not easy to go find the money to be able to get to go to a conference someplace. A little bit easier if you were at Goddard or NASA headquarters and you can come down to National Harbor, but we still need to be able to get people across country. So helping to keep building that picture of how essential that is, so that we don't get the silly rules. And it's not always that the rules themselves become the impediment, but after a while they just provide the chilling effect that you get the chicken and the egg of somebody saying, boy, if I can't go to the conference, then I'm not going to spend my Friday night polishing this paper. I'm going to do something else and I'll get to it next week. And it slows that flow. So being able to build that environment with some certainty with the stakeholders that people will be able to go and participate and engage with their peers and engage with the folks that are part of their career ahead of them and learn from them what they did.
David?
I think I'd pick up on what Mike said. I think clearly we need to protect the professional standards issue. But I think we do need to go back and ask the younger population exactly what is the value proposition with AIAA. How could AIAA give them what it is that they feel they need? I think that would be an interesting dialogue to have, because I know whatever it was that brought me into this area is certainly not the same as what brings the new folk in. So I think it is a case of going back to in effect your customers and say, look, what can we do? What can we do for you? How can we construct it? What are the means of engagement? What are the mechanisms that really align to the way you see the world? But I think no one would argue that it has to be within this frame of, as you say, professional exchange, professional dialogue, professional challenge, because that's what this really is all about. But I think there is a great opportunity to reopen that dialogue with the younger members and maybe adapt exactly how the AIAA works to really encourage the engagement of these guys.
Okay. Right.
Jim, I think two things. Number one, I think the organization has to look at the value proposition at all the levels in the organization. So what is the senior leadership value? Maybe it's policy change, immigration reform. What do mid-level managers value? And then what do the new engineers value? and they're different. And so by appealing to the various levels in the organization, then you don't get the junior engineer wanting to go to a conference and you get the no because this person doesn't understand the value proposition, can't get the budget because this person doesn't understand the value proposition. That's the first thing. So understand the value chain within the organization. The second one is recognizing that the budgetary pressures probably aren't going to go away anytime soon, and associated with that, especially from the government side, there are even restrictions on the number of people who can attend conferences. And so recognizing the role of mobility and of connecting electronically as opposed to or in support of face-to-face meetings, recognizing that those are more expensive. So those two things.
Hope the board of directors got all those great comments. Hey, let me take advantage of having four of the technology leaders in our industry by asking a question of them. And that question is, what are the one or two or maybe three enabling technologies that you think are fundamental to driving us forward, fundamental in keeping, not just aerospace, but the United States in aerospace, in the lead? And why don't we start with you, Mike, on that one? You're thinking about the future all the time. I know all four of you are thinking about the future.
So I have absolutely no evidence to base this on, but I'll tell you that that the thing that intrigues me most right now is where's the intersection between biology and engineering. We see little bits and pieces of bio-inspired systems. We see places where people are starting to learn from the biological world. But there are probably a million things out there in the way of new ways to build things where you grow them rather than manufacture them. That many of the things that we currently do with chemical engineering, life support systems, other things, are there things that we can pull out of the biological world, particularly with the amount of money that's being invested in that over the last decades and the degree to which the technology is invested in that side, in which you now actually know how to design systems. And are there things that you can actually design a biological system that can do some piece of what we would have done with a physical or electrical system in the past? So I really would like to see more emphasis being paid on people thinking about that and trying to start finding those intersections and understanding. Because one of the things I found when we were pushing on that a bit at NASA was there's could find almost nobody who was conversant with both fields. Mm-hmm. And that makes it really, really hard to throw a bunch of engineers in with a bunch of biologists and think they're going to have a productive conversation. Yeah. So we need to start having people that can reach across the lines, and frankly this has been done before, because if you look at the early history of genetics that have led us to where we were, many of the folks that were the groundbreakers in that spent their time during the war working on the Manhattan Project or other high-tech defense technologies. The war was over, and they turned themselves to an intriguing field. And I think it's time to bring some of those things back together.
Very good. John?
With Mike, I'm very interested in the intersection between biology, information and computer science, materials engineering, how that goes into self-assembly, robotics. But as much as I'm interested in those fields, I never want to get away from just the basic blocking and tackling that we still need to do. We still need to make sure that all our engineers, while they're thinking about those far out things, are making sure that the answers that are coming out of the computer are right, are doing the good systems engineering to make sure there's no unintended consequences when they're linking things together. So back to the future on one side, and then some of these exciting developments that Mike talked about on the other.
Ray?
I have two things that come to mind. One of them has, I think, more direct applicability to the aerospace industry, and maybe the other one, maybe mankind in general more broadly. I think material science revolution. The ability to, and not just nanotechnology, but the broad application of chemistry to material science and to a better understanding of materials at the molecular level, and how that's going to open up changes in the engineer's design book and a whole new set of materials that we will be able to build products and that almost affect everything in our life. And then when you couple that with the energy picture, especially in the United States, it brings about possible change to the manufacturing profile in the United States, bring back manufacturing here, and it really has dramatic societal and economic impact on the U.S. in particular. The second one would be kind of information technology, but information technology of a different kind. It'll be mathematicians, it'll be analysts, it'll be scientists who understand information technology, who solve ultimately the true genome picture and understand that. And as we move away from therapeutic and diagnostic drugs that are based on small molecule chemistry and into personalized medicine and really understanding the genome and genomics medicine and proteomics, we will break that code over the next 20, 40, 50 years, and it will bring about dramatic changes to how humans live on the planet. So those are my two answers.
Okay, good. David?
Yeah, I think it's, for me, it's the sort of the concept of a designer product, if you like, and that could well be the fusion of engineering and biology to come up with a particular activity, maybe grown through 3D printing or whatever else you want to think about, or indeed the fusion of the different chemistry and material science areas to come up with designer materials. But I think for me the future, leaving aside the traditional blocking and tackling, is all around bespoke solutions, very customized solutions in terms of any of the major fields of structure, materials, information, etc., etc. So I think that's really where the future lies.
Very good. Do we have any questions? Can you bring the cards up? Has somebody been collecting those? I'm not seeing a flurry of activity out there. I see a couple people running around. Let me pose another question while we're trying to gather the cards. I mean, I know that every company up here and every company, sitting here being represented is doing something about STEM. And in my sense is that, collectively we can do a lot more to support STEM than we can do as individual companies or individual entities. But, any thoughts on how we can improve STEM and how we can try to drive some of the young people, into science and technology? With that in mind, Mike, maybe you could try to answer that.
Well, let's see. I think part of that goes back to a comment that was made earlier, is that we need to have the things out there that really inspire. That I guess I'll show my age and say, I was in second grade when Sputnik flew, and so it was, you couldn't avoid space when I was a young kid growing up. So it was out there, and you say, boy, there's something I could learn, see to do, and the mere fact that you're engaged in that starts building the knowledge and starts making when you're having your science topics in elementary school, and then start getting into things like algebra when you get into middle school. Oh, this is part of what you have to do if you're going to do one of these exciting things. So you've got to have those out there to create it, because it's, you're not going to have kids that are going to come out that are just going to take algebra because they think algebra is fun. Most of them are going to look at it because it's a way to get to something else. Frankly, I think the other picture that we've got to be building out there is that I'm a believer that folks learn best from the people, or are inspired best from the people that are ahead of them. So you've got to have that long-term goal. But I think it's going to be the kids in middle school that are going to be looking at the students that are ahead of them and saying they're learning, they're seeing, they're doing, they have a chance. Or they're looking at the kids that are in college and saying, wow, I could do that, and see a path forward. It can't be I just slug away on my math and my science courses, and then 20 years from now I become an astronaut, right? There's got to be a pathway in between there. So we have to build that picture. And frankly, I think we need to engage each of those communities in reaching back to the folks that are right behind them and saying, come on, you can come with me.
David?
Yeah, I think that there's, as John said, I think popular culture actually has got a lot to play in this particular debate. A brief story, CSI finally made it across the Atlantic. I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, I guess. And the year after CSI, whichever the version it was that was shown, there was a dramatic jump in requests for kids to join the forensic science degrees, and the majority of those were in women. Up to that point, forensic science degrees were substantially undersubscribed, and it jumped to something like 2 or 3 times being oversubscribed. And I think they traced it back to some particular cool character in the CSI environment. And I think it's again trying to find the way by which you can connect with this generation to say that this is cool, this is really, really interesting. And I think sometimes we just have to think a little bit outside the box. So if I had to spend my money on STEM, I'd probably be talking to Fox or HBO or one of those guys to say, hey, what about a great series around aeronautics and aerospace? And I think if I look back at my career, at the time when I was growing up, there were some really cool series around there, and that was certainly what hooked me into this area.
Yeah. Ray?
Today, I think we need to do work on 2 areas. One would be process, and the other one would be cultural. So from a process point of view, I think we need to move the idea that science, technology, engineering, and math is a difficult subject that requires a lot of work, and move it to it's hands-on and fun. So greater exposure to hands-on activities is one thing. And then culturally, I think we, particularly in the United States, do a terrible job of celebrating science and engineering. And we celebrate other things. We celebrate movie stars, we celebrate athletes, but we don't do a very good job of celebrating people who create things and really build the world around us from an economic and from a functional point of view. I'm happy to say that for all of you in the audience, both here in the room and who might listen to this on the web, in April, there is the 3rd USA Science and Engineering Festival at the Washington Convention Center. We are the host and founding sponsor of this event. It'll be an opportunity for you and your families to get exposed to thousands of hands-on experiments and demonstrations, et cetera. So that's what we're doing to work on this cause.
Okay, that's great. John?
The last popular culture reference to engineering on TV that I remember was the professor on Gilligan's Island, and that was a long time ago. Maybe MacGyver, was an engineer, but I do think this partnership with the entertainment industry that does exist. We've been working with them to get positive role models for engineers in film. Like the rest of the companies up here, we invest a significant amount of money, probably about $35 million a year into STEM education. And many other companies do that. There's many organizations that are focused on this, but the efforts are fractured and fragmented and branded by the particular organization. I really do think we have an opportunity to work together across industry, across these professional organizations to get to the same result, and that's to inspire young people to pursue careers that would otherwise not be possible for them to achieve because they just don't know about them. So I do think there's a way for us to work together in a non-competitive way so the ship of aerospace can sort of rise on the sea of this whole new wave of kids. The secret, though, is changing the story. Right now, people think of aerospace engineers as people that have to take very hard math classes or physics, and they think about the difficulty of the curriculum rather than first thinking about the problems that the people that work in the industry can solve, and how that if you're in this industry, you're going to make a better place. When kids are thinking about becoming doctors, they don't think about the difficulty of organic chemistry. They think about, I'm going to be able to help people. And we have to have that same kind of story and thought processes in people's minds when they think about aerospace engineering as well.
Yeah, I can build on that. I mean, I think there are a lot of places where you can reach out also beyond just the traditional classroom. So if we talk about, how do you make this exciting and fun and put it in a problem-solving basis, things like makerspaces. Yeah. How would you get out there and start helping to sponsor or at least help with the creation of more of those things and get more kids in? Yeah. Let them go build stuff, do stuff, and then all of a sudden they find out they need to learn something else to understand what it was they were doing or get over a problem that's real to them.
Yeah, engineers make the world a better place. There's no question about that.
Amen.
And it's not about the analysis. It's not about the time you spend in the lab. It's not about the modeling and simulation. It's a collective pride that you have in your team and being on a team when that airplane takes off for the first time, or that rocket takes off for the first time, or deploy a new satellite. I don't think there's a better feeling in the world than that. I'd like to thank this panel. I think AIAA has some actions as a result. And we appreciate all of you being here this morning. I know how busy your schedules are, and I know, having worked in a big company, that there are always issues to solve, so we've taken you away from a few problems, but thank you for helping us get aligned this morning.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay. That's great. Good answer.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Good comments. Good to